Hey, listener, I have a real treat for you today. I have Phil Robertson's daughter, Phyllis Robertson Thomas, with me, and I am just thrilled to be able to introduce you to her and for her to share her story about how she found out that Phil Robertson of Duck Dynasty was her dad. It is just the craziest God story that one of the craziest ones I've ever heard. And so I am delighted to have her on the podcast. And so, Phyllis, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I just have to say before you introduce yourself a little bit more that I have bought every Duck Dynasty book for my son, who used to be called. He loved being called a redneck, back in the day. But his first Bible, like as an adult, that I gave him was the Duck Dynasty Bible and all that.
Oh,
So
wow.
we've loved Duck Dynasty and Phil Robertson for a long time, but I want you to talk about yourself and tell the listener just a little bit about who you are, what you do, where you live, and all the good stuff about your family.
Okay. Gosh, it's hard to know where to start and
I know.
stop with all of this story, but okay, so I was born in Louisiana, and that's where I grew up.
Hmm.
And my mom originally was from Missouri, Southwest Missouri. So think Branson,
Yeah.
near the like Arkansas, Oklahoma border in the southern part of the state. And so we would visit back and forth a lot. And I got married. We'll fast forward a lot. I got married when I met my husband when I was 17. So I was
Hmm.
visiting Missouri actually between my junior and senior year of high school. So I went up to Missouri to visit my siblings, and because they had since moved to Missouri, and met my husband, now husband, and we dated that summer. I went home to Louisiana and missed him. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to move up there. And I had been pretty much on my own. We can talk about that if you like, but
Yeah.
I ended up I went and got my records transferred myself. I had a car, I had furniture. I got a U-Haul, loaded it up, and moved to Missouri at the very
Nice.
beginning of my senior year by myself, enrolled in college, I mean in high school. And I remembered that I secured an apartment, but I had to turn 18 because the lady said, you can't sign this paperwork until you're 18 years old. And I'm like, what do you mean? I've given you money. And she's like, you're all good when you turn 18. So it was like a couple weeks out. It was September when I moved up there. So I stayed with my sister for a couple weeks, went up there, signed the paperwork, and moved into an apartment, finished my senior year of high school. And then 2 weeks after I graduated high school, my husband and I, we got married. And by the way, when I met him, I was 17 and he was 23. And I didn't realize at the time how that looked
Yeah. An older
because I
man.
was 17 going on 30, and he was a 23-year-old boy going on 17, how boys can be sometimes. But we got married, and then 2 weeks later, I was pregnant. So
Oh my
I
God.
was a teenager basically when I had my oldest son, Grant. I was 19 by then. But we've been married 32 years. We've gone through a lot, but God is good, and we've kept him at the center of our marriage, and we've made it through a lot. And we ended up having one more son. He had ADHD, so my Atlanta, we he kept us busy. So we were like, I think we're done. So
Yeah.
we have a 31-year-old and a 28-year-old, and they're both married.
Hmm.
And our oldest and his wife, they have two babies. They're babies. They're 4 and 2 years old.
That's
And so
baby.
I'm Nana.
I
Yeah, they're
love that.
babies. They're so sweet. So I'm Nana, and then our youngest son Joel and his wife Kendall, they don't have babies yet, but they're still they've been married 6 years, but they're still gallivanting. And I think this is one big trip they're about to take because they leave tonight to go to Italy.
Oh,
They're so
wow.
excited.
I would be
Yeah, so we're
excited.
gonna
Yeah.
yeah, we've got a grand dog that we watch, and so we're going to be taking care of Baxter and Lilo, the cat, while they're gone to Italy. So
Wow. That'll be fun, I'm
yeah,
sure.
yeah. So anyway, we've lived, when my husband and I got married, we lived down in Louisiana for a while. We ended up moving to Missouri with our kids. Kind of fast forwarding again, we ended up on the mission field. So we can talk about that a little bit if you want to.
Hmm.
And we came back from the mission field in 2018, knowing there was something up with who is my dad. There was a
Okay.
question in there. Uh, and then we ended up living in Louisiana from like 2020 around COVID time to last year. So toward the end of last year, we ended up moving back officially to Missouri because that's where the grandbabies are. So
Of course.
that's kind of sums it all up. So
Yep.
wife, mom, Nana. And then I'm also, yeah, I ended up going to nursing school. So when our youngest son Joel went to kindergarten, I stayed home with them. When he went to kindergarten, I went back to college. Finally went to college actually, and majored in nursing. Became a nurse. Worked as it's been 20 years now since I graduated.
Wow.
But then a few years ago, just with everything that's been happening with my story, I really felt like I could really serve women and children, especially, but anyone more as a therapist. And I kind of weighed out psychiatric nurse practitioner or therapy. And I decided to go with being a therapist. And so now I am a therapist, family therapist for the Center for Children and Families in Monroe, Louisiana.
Hmm.
And my clients are children ages 4 to 21 and their families. And that's where my license is. I'm still provisionally licensed because I'm new,
Right.
but I'm that's where my license is, and so I see all my clients via telehealth, and it's awesome. I love it.
That's amazing that you can do that. That is so great
Mm-hmm.
because you can live where you need to be, but you can still help the kids in that area. So that is so
Yes,
awesome.
yes.
Well, so I feel like probably most everybody should know that Phil Robertson found out in 2020 that he had a daughter he knew nothing about, but
Mm-hmm.
you had no idea that your dad, that you had always called dad, was not your real dad until
Mm-hmm.
what, 2019 or so?
Yeah. So what happened is we were in Nicaragua serving as missionaries, and we came home the Christmas of 2017,
Hmm.
and our oldest son's girlfriend at the time, now wife, the mama of my grandbabies, bought him a an ancestry DNA test for
Uh-huh.
his ethnicity for fun. And so he got the results by Christmas. We came home, and he's like, "Mom, there's something up with the DNA, like this doesn't match what we thought our ethnicity was." And I looked at it and I'm like, "You're absolutely right. Something is not right." And so I talked to my brother, and he was pretty quick to know like either what we know about our ethnicity is not correct, which didn't seem likely based on people's names and everything that we knew culturally. So or we don't have the same dad, which did not it did not that was not shocking to me.
Mm.
It was kind of surprising with timing and finding out, but it just in the back of my mind I had always questioned. And um there were things about me that were different, my personality, differences, physical features,
I was going to
differences
say,
with
did
my
you look
siblings.
different from your
Mm-hmm.
siblings?
And
What?
you can easily pass that off of just like not all siblings look alike
Right.
exactly
There's a
or
gene in
exactly the
there
same.
somewhere that,
Right, 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 right. So it's not like I don't have anything in common with them. I do, but
right.
I always felt different. I
Mhm.
always was a little weird, is what I like to say. Just kind of a weirdo, kind of nerdy, just very outspoken, very blunt. And they can be outspoken and blunt, but I was just different, I guess. And so I thought, you know what, this is crazy. And my sister said, there was a cousin once who was mad at me about something and said, "Your Phyllis is not even Wayne's daddy." And she's like, "I threatened to hit her and said, don't ever say that again." So then she says this to me, and I'm like, "Why am I just now hearing about this?"
Mhm.
So we went back to Nicaragua, and I had these questions. So from December to the end of like the spring or early summer, I was battling and wrestling with these questions, and we would drop hints to my mom, when we were even around Christmas, and other times when we met, we're like, "Hey, what about this thing about, do we know who Phyllis's dad is?" And she just would not open up about anything. So we had no answers. And we were in Nicaragua. That's where we served for 5 years. And they were going through civil unrest. And we began to feel unsafe. And at the time, I've done a lot more healing now. I had done a lot of healing up till then, but I came from a really rough childhood, a lot of trauma. And my nervous system was just out of whack. And I felt very afraid. We had actually had like a little attack on our car when we were driving once, while we were there. And I was afraid. So
Yeah.
we ended up leaving on the first flight we could get when we decided we were going. We left Nicaragua in May of 2018. And so when we got back to the States, my sister's like, "You take the test, I'll take the test, and we'll compare." So we did. And sure enough, we did not have the same dad. We were able to look and find all the matches. And leading up to that point, I was like, I'm fine. You know, my dad who raised me, he loved me and he passed away in 2012. And I have a heavenly father, I have a wonderful relationship with the Lord and my husband and my boys. I'm fine. But as soon as I found out for sure that I had a dad that I didn't know about, I suddenly wanted to know more. And we
Mm.
did a lot of research and digging. And then one thing led to another. And I had a lot of data and confronted my mom on the phone and said, Mom, like, who's my dad? Well, you know, how do you know? And I'm like, it's DNA science, Mom. Like, we know it, we know,
Yeah.
and you've got to know, at least whittle it down somehow. And she mentioned one man's name, and that didn't match anything. And I'm like, no, Mom, that's who is it? And she's like, well, Phil. I'm like, okay, Phil who? And she said, well, he made the duck whistles. Well, I went into that conversation knowing last names on my like
Oh,
family
yeah.
tree that I had put together. And I don't mention this very often. It's just a detail, but I feel like it'll be like a little factoid to put in. Just talking to you, you might appreciate this. That when I was doing research and looking up, and I had no idea anything about Phil Robertson, nothing like that. I was putting in, you can use find a grave, I think it is
My
.com. You can
son
look at it.
uses that. He's very
Mhm.
interested in family history.
If
Yeah.
you love family history and genealogy, Find a Grave is a gem.
Yeah.
Obituaries, even because if you're looking on Ancestry DNA, a lot of times if someone's still alive or for whatever reasons, they'll mark it private. So you'll see a placeholder where
Yeah.
so and so had a child or whatever, but it may not have their name. Well, all you have to do is go to someone who's passed away. You go on to like obituaries, and it says they're survived by
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
daughter, niece, whatever. And so it's pretty easy to connect the dots. So I found names and I was filling those in my little family tree, and I was just doing Google searches and things, and a book popped up. And so I looked at like this excerpt of a book, and it said, yeah, named after so and so and lived next door to my Aunt Willie and things like that. And I'm looking and I'm like, oh, okay, a family from Louisiana. And I'm like, oh, the book, okay, it was written by the Duck Dynasty family person. I knew about the show, didn't watch it, but I realized that this is a family, a man from North Louisiana who's citing family members. And I'm like, that's within the realm of possibility because I grew up about 45 minutes or so from these folks.
Okay.
And so I even mentioned to my husband, I'm like, oh, by the way, I think I have some cousins with that family who had a TV show in Louisiana. And so
Did you
that
have
his
any
book,
idea how
Happy,
big this show was?
no, Happy, Happy, Happy was the book, and it had
Yeah.
some family names in there. And so I filled those in. So by the time I was having that conversation with my mom, I had whittled it down to like, I know who my grandparents, great grandparents are for sure. Pretty sure I know who my grandparents are. So that means this family, you know, last name Robertsons, and this man's book pulled up. So there's a chance. I didn't know for sure. But when she said Phil, I'm like, Phil who? And she said, well, he made the duck whistles. And I'm like, well, that that pretty much says it all. It matches the family tree, the genealogy. Even though he had never done an ancestry DNA test and neither had his children, I didn't have a sibling pop up. I had
Mhm.
cousins. My first close match on the paternal side was a cousin, last name Robertson.
Hey, friends, if you're here because you love hearing real stories of courage, faith, and family, I want to tell you something. God isn't finished writing your story either. Sometimes the next chapter begins when you step away from your everyday life and give yourself room to hear from Him. That's what the Flourish Retreat is, a getaway for women seeking clarity, calling, and connection. Over the weekend, Julie Bagwell, Brittany Bruce, and I will host sessions that help you see how your past may point to your purpose. Recognize the gifts God has placed within you, and consider what He may be inviting you into next. And in between those sessions, you'll soak in the beauty of the Lowcountry with historic home tours, carriage rides, shared meals, and deep conversations that turn strangers into sisters. If this podcast has reminded you that God can redeem anything at any time, imagine what He might reveal to you when you step away and let Him speak. I'd love for you to join us at the Flourish Retreat on Kiowa Island in October. Now, back to our guest. Okay.
Yeah.
So then, what did you do after you found out?
Mm. So realizing who we believed it was, you know, I suddenly was very concerned because I was like, okay, they're a Christian family. like people know about them, and I wouldn't want to. I don't know anything about them really. Like if they're genuine reality TV, this could all be fake. I
Yeah.
don't know,
Yeah.
but at the same time, like I care about people, and I didn't want to like do something to negatively reflect on their reputation.
Right. Oh.
But I also wanted to reach out and just find out if he knew about me, or, would he want to meet? Like, what would that look like? And so we wrote a letter. We crafted a really good letter with the family tree stuff and some photos. And I didn't want to mail one to his house because I recognized he had a wife and I didn't want that to happen
Oh.
if he didn't want it to. And so we mailed a letter to the church. After I did more research, I was like, okay, he's an elder and his son is an elder at a church at Whites Ferry Road Church. So I thought, and for me, faith had been a big part of my life. And I, had been serving God for most of my life. And so I thought that's a good, safe landing place. And so I mailed a letter to the church and one to Duck Commander, thinking that could get maybe to him without going through a wife checking the mail kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so we also saw on that website that he was going to be speaking at Whites Ferry Road for like their New Year's Eve, kind of preparing for the next year. And so that was the very end, December of 2019. So my husband and I drove down with a letter in hand. I was going to just hand it directly to him, just making sure it got to him. And he came out, and the first thing I ever saw of him in person was him sharing the gospel. And
Mm.
it was so powerful to me. But then he skedaddled after that message that he shared at Whites Ferry Road. And so, but Jace was there. So I
Uh-huh.
walked up. It took a lot for me to gather the courage to do it. But I walked up to him and handed him the letter and asked if he would please get that to his father, that it meant a lot to me. I said, it's very important to me. And he said, sure, I'll do it. So a few weeks later, I got a call from a 318 area code, and that's the North Louisiana area code.
Mhm.
And it was Zach Dasher. He said, I'm Phil's sister Jan's son. And we got your letter and read it. And he's like, I believe you. Just like that. He's like, and we talked for quite a while on the phone. He said, it's like I'm talking to my mom, who had just
Wow.
passed away in September that year of
Wow.
2019. And he's like, I believe you. He's like, if this is true, and I think it is, you and I are first cousins. And I'm
That's
like,
crazy.
wow, it was so crazy. And so they arranged paternity testing. So by that time, we had moved to Missouri. And so we each did our own testing, and the results came back, and they called me and said, yeah, it's a match. You are Phil Robertson's daughter.
Mm.
And that was in January of 2020. And so we arranged for our family to go down and meet their family, in February of 2020. So both boys were by then engaged. And so all six of us flew down to Louisiana from
Oh,
Missouri
wow.
and met all of them. And, you know, really, God just did a miraculous thing. We accepted them with open arms and loved them, and they accepted us with open arms and loved us. And I now have had a lot of people reach out to me, and I recognize that does not happen a lot. Some of those stories are so sad and heartbreaking, but I share that story for a reason. There's threads throughout this story and my history, my past growing up. Not everyone has experienced the exact same things, but the themes that are there are generalizable, which sounds like a technical term, but it's appropriate to everybody. Like it can resonate with a lot of different people. So I'm hopeful that there are some listeners here today that can resonate with having a traumatic background, having really hard things happen even in adulthood, and maybe even finding out about a parent, because Ancestry DNA has unveiled a lot of really well kept secrets.
It has. Yes.
23andMe and these types of things. And so people are finding this stuff out, and it can be, I mean, it will wreck your world. And then there's, of course, people who've been adopted that
Yeah.
are trying to find family. So there's a lot to that. So mine did have this type of ending, but doesn't mean that the journey was not difficult at times.
Mhm.
But I recognize that some people may not have
Yeah.
had the
You
privilege of that.
you have a blessed ending. You really do. It's
I
funny.
do.
I interviewed a girl a couple of years ago, I guess, and like she didn't know that her dad was
Mm,
not her dad. And I can't remember the whole story, but I really didn't think that it would be like it would kind of blow up, because I'm like, how many people have that story? And oh my
mm,
gosh, I was amazed at how many downloads that one got because
mm-hmm.
apparently That is happening a lot more than we even thought could be happening.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think what you're doing is a really good thing. I want to go to when I think it was Al and his wife picked you up from the airport, you and your family up
Mm-hmm.
from the airport, and then took you to meet Phil. So, can you talk about that? Because I thought that was just one of the most heartwarming things that I had ever heard.
Mm-hmm. Well, when those results came back, we suddenly started getting all the calls. And so Al and Lisa, of course, called first. That's just who they are with Miss K. And, and she was the one I was most worried about, to be
Yeah,
honest.
yeah.
But her being Miss K, now that I know her, I think America already knew her very well, but she is just the sweetest person. And she said, I always wanted a daughter. So she was just so sweet on the phone. But they called and Al, we spent hours on the phone. It was like I'd always known him, just an
Mm,
immediate connection. And that was really, really special. But all the brothers called me individually. The two oldest that knew my dad the best when he was, like Miss Kay says, living for the devil and running with the devil,
mhm.
they really warned me like he is not affectionate. He is not a nurture. He's a man's man. He's a very hard man. So we just want to prepare you. They were really worried about me. Like, what is
Yeah.
she expecting from him? This man who shows no affection to anybody. He's not warm. He's not cuddly. Like, ugh, be careful. So when they picked us up from the airport, Al and I, just hugged and there were tears and then it was laughs and um, let's knock this off and just start hanging out and enjoying this time together. And it was like I'd always known him. And Lisa, so special. They're just dear people. We're very close to them. So we got in the truck with Al and Lisa drove the kids in the other vehicle and we pulled up to meet my dad and Miss Kay and they were standing outside and I got out of the truck and began to walk toward him and they kind of walked toward me and he reached up with his hands and he put them on either side of my face and looked me in the eyes and he said, I never knew.
Mm.
So it was just this moment of had he known and not reached out to me or ever tried to contact me, that would have been another level of hurt and disappointment
Yeah,
for
yeah.
sure. But he had tears in his eyes and he was very nurturing. And of course, Miss Kay hugged me so hard and they each grabbed a hand and walked me into the house. And he had already arranged to spend time with me there, just the two of us. And so we went into the living room while the kids were meeting, Miss Kay and Alan, Lisa, and their kids. And we sat on the couch for like 30 or 45 minutes and just talked. And he asked me about my life and just like, what kind of person am I? He wanted to know who I was. And Lisa told me later, she said, I have been in this family for 30 something years and I have never had a one on one conversation with Phil Robertson last
Wow.
30 or 45 minutes. We have never had a conversation like that. So, but here I am. This is all I know is
Right.
what he's showing me. I don't know anything else. And everyone else, and even over the following years, they watched him be a completely different person with me than
Mm.
he was before.
That's so
And I think that's the
sweet.
power of a girl,
Yeah,
having a
yeah.
daughter. I think it just can knock the rough edges off. But I also knew him later in life, right? I mean, and
Yeah,
just as men get older, they change a little
they
bit.
do.
But I was never anybody that knew about his past. I
Mm.
never experienced the hardened Phil Robertson. And even those years that God changed his heart, he was just, and I was a daughter. And I think it was just different for him.
Mhm.
But I was always nurtured by him. I felt like he was always nurturing, even though I was a middle aged woman and he was an elderly man. Like he was very kind and nurturing. And since then, I've written a book and I called it I Never Knew because one, that's the first thing he ever said to me. And two, I never knew how much God could take so many broken and ugly pieces and turn them into something beautiful. Like I knew that and I had plenty of testimony in my own life, but just God did this amazing thing in my life in those few years that I had with him. And I'm here to share all of the things that are hard because I know people need to hear it and it's just an amazing testimony.
It really is. And one thing that when I was listening to your story um about that everything pretty much was documented on film. I mean, well, not real
Hmm.
film, but videoed or
Yeah.
taken photos of, but not that moment. So, because when I
Not
first
that
saw
moment.
the cover of the book, at first I thought it was a photo, and then I was like, no, this is a painting. And so,
Hmm.
tell us about that.
Yeah. And knowing what I know now, it didn't seem strange at the time that it was just a few family members. It was really just Alan and Lisa, their family that day with my family and my dad and Miss Kay. There were no cameras. It was a private moment as it should have been. So
Yes.
nobody captured that moment with his hands on my face. It was just in our beautiful memories that we have. But my husband is an artist and he also specializes in doing portraits for folks. And so he reimagined that scene and painted that. So it's actually an oil painting that he did of that day of my dad's hand on my face.
Wow.
So it's
You
super
have that
special.
hanging in your house? I mean, I'm sure you do.
He's got, he needs to paint some of the edges around. I need to get on him. I'm glad you
Yes.
mentioned that. But
You
no, it's an original painting. It is here with us. We're in kind of a temporary space right now. So we don't have a lot of stuff hung up, and a lot of our stuff is even in storage.
okay.
We've
Well,
been in limbo, but yes, I do have that.
yeah. Put that on
Yeah,
your
and it
to-do
will be hanging.
list. Yeah.
Definitely, definitely. I think he still needs to varnish it. I'm going to have to get on him to finish that painting up. He just
Yes.
kind of left it undone around the edges, which he liked that vibe, but I don't know. I think I want him to kind of carry the paint out a little bit to the edges.
Yeah. That is such a beautiful gift. I mean, it really,
Yes.
really is. So
Mm-hmm.
when you were introduced, like from everything that I have heard, you were welcomed with open arms. And I even, Jace, I was listening to him talk about it yesterday, and he even said he just loved you from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about love a lot in that episode.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, that's so crazy how, first of all, you'd think, "Ah, yeah, dad, stepped out on mom. And, you'd think
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of families, that would just destroy the
Mm-hmm.
children. But I think they have lived such a life of seeing the grace of God through what
Yeah.
God did with their dad, because they are the
Mm-hmm.
older two and they really saw a lot of it.
They
But
did.
yeah, so talk about how they responded to you and how they welcomed you and all. I mean, that's a big family. That's a
A very
really
big
big
family.
family. Yeah.
We left that setting of that initial meeting and we all drove over to Willie's house, which was a much, much, much larger house. And the rest of the brothers and their wives and some kids and Uncle Si were there. And they were very smart about that because had we arrived with that many people, it would have
Oh
been very
yeah.
overwhelming. But it wasn't even all of their children. There were a few that kind of came in and out, which I wouldn't have even picked up on because
Mhm.
there were just so many people.
Yeah.
And my mom's side of the family, we have a lot of cousins. She had a lot of sisters, but we were never like all together all the time, that many people. So it would have, been overwhelming for me. So they really did a great job of buffering me from some of
That's
that.
awesome.
But so you were asking about just being welcomed by them. Is that right? Is that
Yeah,
kind of
like
what you
how
were
the
wanting to know?
brothers reacted, because I know you said they
Mhm.
each called you.
They
So,
did. They did.
like, how did that go?
That was so interesting. So with Al, it was so many great, meaningful conversations. Jep wanted to know, what movies are you into and what kind of music do you like? And I always wanted a big sister and or have a sister. It was just super fun. Like, and I was the youngest in my mom's family, youngest by a lot of years. My brother and sister
Oh,
are 9 and 10 years older than me. So
okay.
like
Okay.
like baby slash only child, because by the time I was cognizant of the world around me, they were pretty much starting to leave home a lot, stay with friends because home life was really rough.
Mm,
And then they were kind of out of the house by the time they were in their teens. And so I was kind of by myself most of the time. So only child-ish. So it was kind of fun to have a little brother and have that kind of conversation with him. And he's very sweet and very kind, very down to earth. And then Jace called and he's a thinker. He's kind of deep sometimes. And we talked for over an hour in one phone call,
oh,
so
wow.
and he spent time just talking about that and kind of what kind of person he was and kind of also wanting to prepare me. And then Willie's call was, and actually Jace called me the last. Willie's call was very warm, and then the humor. It was the humor and just keeping things lighthearted, and which is his way.
Hmm.
And he's witty and humorous, and so all of it was very positive. And then meeting everybody, really what it points to, it doesn't point to, and the Robertsons are awesome. It's a wonderful family. There's no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And they've lived that out in front of a lot of people. But here's the thing, it's genuine and Jesus is at the center of it. It's
Mm-hmm.
only the love of Christ and forgiveness that we realize we have in him, that verse about forgive because you've been forgiven, when you live that every day and you realize how much you've been forgiven, and they all have stories of things that they've experienced in their marriages and in with their children. And like when you've gone through so much and you realize like, hey, you know what? We're all just human beings. We're flawed. That resentment and hurt just didn't hang on.
Mm.
And Miss K had already dealt with the worst of that, right? There's a movie about it. They
Yeah.
reconciled and my dad gave his heart to the Lord. This stuff happened before he was a believer.
Mm-hmm.
So when forgiveness
It was the
happens,
same
and
year, right? Wasn't
it
it
was
the
the same
same
year.
year?
Jace is the one who
Yeah.
pointed that out. The year that you were born is the year dad was born again. So I
That's
was
so awesome.
conceived, I guess, at the very, very end of 74, I think, or right around the first, it was duck season of 74, 75.
Yeah. Whenever
So
that is.
yeah, yeah. And so later that year around summertime or so, I think is when my dad gave his heart to the Lord. And then I was born in October. I was due at the end of September, but not born till October. That's why I'm trying to do math in my mind real quick. But so he had given his heart to the Lord by then.
Mm.
And and that family understands forgiveness and they understand reconciliation. And if
Yeah.
you read any of their stories, you said you bought all the books, and even stories that even books that they've written since then, like Al and Lisa's Desperate Forgiveness and
Oh, yeah.
Sister Roar and all of those things. My dad's book, even he laid it all out there. And so thankfully there was no scandal because he had already shared his testimony. This is the kind of person
Yeah.
I was. He never hid it.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I think that we all have in common. It's not like I had to learn this. I was already like this. It kind of goes to personality. I was willing to write a book to share all the hard things and all the beautiful things to let other people know, like, this stuff happens in families. And
Yeah.
instead of letting it implode and blow everybody apart or further apart, when possible, when it's safe for people, let it be redeeming, let it
Mm.
bring healing and reconciliation when it can. I'm not discounting that sometimes that's not possible. And every situation is nuanced, and I want to honor people whose story may be different. But
Right.
whenever it's possible, Paul tells us to seek peace and to seek reconciliation if at all possible.
Yeah. And one thing I know, because I don't think we talked about this while we were recording, but when they got, so when Jace got the letter, and he got it from two different, because he didn't open the one that you gave him. He
Right.
forgot
That got
about
stuck in a
it.
bag and I think was probably lost forever.
Yeah.
Um, they would go by and pick up mail at Duck Commander and then bring it out to where my dad lives and then like be able to kind of divvy out mail that maybe needed to go to him. And so Jace pulls the one out and is looking at it. He's like, I'll take a look at this. And they apparently had gotten letters like this from people before, like, hey, I'm a cousin or a
Yeah.
relative or whatever. Maybe even people saying they were a kid. I really don't know. But also I was like, yeah, probably not. And Jace is the one who was like, but look at the photos, like look at the pictures of her. And there's not a lot of Robertson women. So I hear about this backstory later. But
Uh-huh.
he's like, I think you need to take a look at this one. So I looked at it and read it. And I had the family tree in there, which could have been concocted, but my husband's a detail guy. So
Mhm.
it was very detailed. He helped me with that. And so they looked at it and he's like, well, if you feel like it's got if it's warranted, we can bring it up. So what they did was they made a copy of it, and Al and Lisa went down to my dad and Miss Kay's and they sat in the living room with them and they handed one copy of the letter to my dad and one copy of the letter to Miss Kay and said, don't talk to each other, just read it and then we'll talk about it. So the story goes, my dad's reading it. No, that didn't happen. No, this is and Miss Kay's reading it. Yep. And they're chattering about it, even though they're not supposed to be. Yep, this whoever wrote this, they know details. This
Oh,
is absolutely true. And so that's how the conversation went. And my dad was like, okay, he's like, this isn't true. I don't remember any of this. And Miss Kay's like, you wouldn't have remembered any of it. You were drunk most of the time. Like, how would you have remembered all of this? But I
yeah.
kept tabs on you. And some of these places and some of these names are places and names that I know from those
Yeah.
times that I was keeping tabs on you. So like a wife knows sometimes, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so finally, I was ready for it. He was trying to get to this point where my dad said, "How can we know for sure?"
Mm-hmm.
And, so I was like, "I'm glad you asked." So he explained that we could do paternity testing, blood work. So all it takes is some simple blood work and they'll know for sure. He's like, "Well, let's do it." And as soon as he found out, they called him, gave him the results, and he said, "Well, get her down here." And to him, enough said. Like at that point, it's like I've got a child, like blood relative, and we know for a fact that that's true. So it's time to meet. So he never hesitated, and neither did Miss K. And I told Zach on that very first phone call, if this is not okay for her, like we don't have to take this conversation further at all. Like I totally respect
Right.
that, which
Yeah.
is fair, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but her being her.
Yeah. Well, I just, you have to really respect both of them
Mm-hmm.
for, I mean, again, like you said, there couldn't be a scandal really because everybody knew his past anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Mm-hmm.
not really, I mean, Miss K was not shocked. So
No.
actually, I heard several times that she said, I just knew one day one of your sons would come in here saying,
Mm-hmm.
hey, you know, I'm from your past or, you
Yeah.
know,
And
and
in her mind, all she could envision was another man with a beard.
right. Yeah.
She was waiting for that, and not someone that looked like me, because my
Not a
mom
girl.
my mom was a strawberry blonde.
Okay.
Is she's just older now, so hair colors
Right.
change. But she was a strawberry blonde.
Hmm.
So I was a typical like blonde growing up that turns into like a dirty blonde when you get older.
Yeah.
So I just, most of my family, my sister's strawberry blonde, they're like blonde headed and redheaded people. So
Uh-huh.
I definitely had a different look. And the fact that I'm a girl, did not have a
Mm.
beard. So
I think that made it a whole lot easier for her to accept too, because since she
yeah.
had always wanted a daughter. So,
Mm-hmm. It might have been more weird for her to have a son that looked, had
you
that same
know,
look about him.
it might have been, yeah. But one
Mm-hmm.
of the things that I heard Phil say, and I want to talk about this a little bit, is, and I feel like he was even just very emotional about this, was that if he would have known that he had a little girl out there somewhere who was dealing with the things that you were having to deal
Mm-hmm.
with. I mean, you were
Mm-hmm.
homeless from, I can't remember how old you were. Like, you were young, like 14 or so.
Well, I basically left home, like where
Okay.
home was. Yeah, I left home. It would have been, for me, I believe this, it would have been great if I had had a home to go to with a parent like him and
Oh,
and with
yeah.
Miss K. So, and I know that, I've heard stories, he was rough around the edges. People tried to make me feel better and would say like, no, you wouldn't have liked him back then, because he still was rough around the edges. But I guess that's assuming, when you're talking to someone like that, you're assuming that their life was somewhat quote unquote normal. And
Hmm.
this would have been so abnormal. But first of all, it's the same area. Like it was the same area of Louisiana. My family that I grew up with was very poor,
Hmm.
not a lot of education. And it was just, the situation was not great. So yeah, so it would have been nice to have a place to live. It was very unstable. We moved every 3 to 6 months
Wow.
routinely. And
Wow.
most of the time, it was big, giant arguments, domestic violence. My mom and my dad that I grew up with, I call him my dad because that's who I grew up with, but I'll try to clarify that for the listener. But my dad, Wayne, that was his
Hmm.
name. They would fight and separate, and they would get back together, and then they would fight and separate and get back together. The cops were called, and it was just rough. There was a lot of partying. My mom had a partying streak in her. So there was lots of different men. So when she was separated, he would be with a girlfriend and I would go stay with him and this girlfriend, or he would have his own house and I would try to stay with him. But he also had had a traumatic brain injury from before I was born. So after my siblings were born, but before me in the late 60s, he was in a bad car wreck, drunken driving, and had a bad head injury. But he was with it, like for the most part. But he would have a seizure sometimes. He had to take medicine. Had a lot of bad headaches, so he was taking pain medicine. Not addicted in the sense that he was not functioning, but when you drink and take pain medicine and seizure medicine, they don't mix well together.
Right. Yeah.
And there were times when he couldn't work and times when he could. And then my mom would waitress or work as working a truck stop. So we never had enough money, which is the story of a lot of people, but poverty is poverty and brings with it
Right.
everything that poverty brings. But when you add up the poverty with the instability, moving all the time, which tends to lead to other things like medical neglect and educational neglect and those kind of things, there was definitely emotional neglect because parents meeting their own needs and not putting the needs of their children as a priority.
Mhm.
And Gen X, we tended to be, left to our own and doing our own things anyway, but
Yeah.
this was taken a way step further. So by the time I was 12 years old, I was living with my mom. At that point, she had met a man that was a short order cook at the truck stop where she worked at that time. And she moved in with him out in the country in North Louisiana. But he lived in a camper and he had built a room onto it. And so by then, I was beginning to experience the first fallout of trauma, lots of depression and anxiety.
Mm.
And I remember just like being sick, sick at my stomach, and I would throw up sometimes and unexplainable. I wasn't inducing that, it just was happening. And that at one point, my mom did take me to the doctor because it was significant enough. And I remember them doing some type of mental health assessment. I didn't realize fully at the time what it was, but I think the doctor had an idea that some of this was emotional, but emotional mental health care, that wasn't a thing back then. So even though I
No.
had really bad depression and anxiety, it did not get treated. And around that time, my dad, Wayne, ended up getting on disability for his head injury and seizure disorder and headaches and things like that. He couldn't work. And so he came out to where we were living one day and he had a check in his hand and he said, "Baby, this check is for you. I didn't put it in your mom's name," which was smart.
Yeah.
It was in his name, and they come to the parent for the child, and they list those names. So he handed me that check that included some back pay. I bought a car, furniture. I was 12. Opened up a checking
What?
account.
You were
Yeah,
12?
I was 12. But by then, remember, I have been all over the place. I had to kind of grow up fast.
God.
So I quickly knew what I needed to do with that money. And so I opened a checking account and managed that money.
How did you open a
I
checking account at 12 years old?
I went down there and to do all the paperwork. And he said, the banker said, "Now, Phyllis, you got to get your daddy to come down here and sign this." And I'm like, "What do you mean? This is my money. Like, I know what he doesn't need to sign." He's like, "Well, you're not old enough to sign for an account." So I'm like, "Okay." So I went and got I guess I drove. I don't remember exactly, but I know that there was no one with me. It's possible that my papa drove me because he would do that a lot. Like I remember like, oh, I can go get my teeth looked at because I had a cavity. I'd never been to the dentist. So like a lot of times my papa would drive me somewhere and let me go do the business I needed to do because he would never go in. And nobody was that high functioning enough to interact with the school. I did all of that. Now my mom did interact with the school. Like she did back to school stuff and all of that. But when I wasn't with her, because I would move in and out, we were back and forth. And I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. So they did not, they were very old, Southern, uneducated folks. So there was no going in and talking to a teacher or taking care of business. I made an appointment with the dentist. He dropped me off, right? I went in and filled out the
Can't
paperwork.
imagine.
And then back in the 80s, like, I don't know that they were strict about some stuff. There wasn't HIPAA and all of that. So they
No,
probably
there
just were
wasn't.
like, "Is that your papa outside? Okay, come on in. Let's get your teeth taken care of."
Yeah.
But the bank was a different situation. You actually had to have an adult. So I don't know if my papa took me, but I think I drove myself in my daddy's car. I knew how to drive. My former sister-in-law had taught me when I was 10 and I had been watching. So I feel like I knew what I was doing. But I brought him up there. He signed off on it, but I had a checkbook and managed that account. And my sister by then had married a man in town whose family owned a restaurant. So when I was 10, I had started working at the restaurant. So I had a little side money. I started out bussing tables, but then I was like waitressing. And then I ended up getting a job. So I worked and had that money from my dad.
And
And when
went to
I was,
school.
and went to school, of course. Yeah. And back and forth, back and forth. But I tried to live with my dad when I was 13 and he wanted a caretaker and I wasn't going to
Mm.
be the woman of the house. I wasn't going to take care of him. By then I was like, I kind of know what I need. I need to stay in school and stay in church and like get out of this situation that I'm in. I tried living with a family member for a short time and it was just rough. I felt like a burden, even though I was helping pay rent, like I paid my way and
Wow.
bought my stuff that I needed. But I just it was just hard. And so a friend of mine from school and her mom, they invited me to come and live with them. I was hanging out with them a lot anyway. They went to church. And so I just moved in with them when I was 14. And it was kind of
Wow.
like a kind of foster care ish, but it wasn't anything official.
Right.
I had money. I paid to live there. They didn't charge me a lot, just offset the utilities a little bit or whatever. I bought my own clothes and toiletries and all that kind of stuff. And I had my own car, went to work. So, I didn't have to be supported.
That is so crazy. Well, tell
And that's
me,
why fast forwarding, like I was able to move by myself. Like by the time I was 17, I had actually moved in with my grandma. My papa had passed away. So I lived with her for a short time and went and visited my siblings. That's why when I was 17, it was not a big deal for me to pack up and move and get an
you had
apartment.
been on your own.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, when did you become a Christian? How did all that transpire? Because you said
This is the
nobody in the
part.
family, right,
mm,
went to
Nobody went to
church
church.
or,
My brother and sister went to a Baptist church through the church bus a little bit when they were teenagers. And one time I know I went with them because I remember them having a bubblegum blowing contest. But nobody went to church. No family members ever took me to church. I had a couple aunts in Missouri who went to church. And my grandma in Louisiana lived next door to an Assembly of God church. And I had friends from school when I'd spend the night, I'd go with them to church. And
okay.
so, with one aunt in Missouri, I went to a Nazarene church and I was just a little kid. I had another aunt that went to like an apostolic holiness Assembly of God church. They didn't wear pants. I'd go to church. She only wore dresses, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
I went to church with them. Yeah, she wore clothes, folks, just not a woman not wearing pants. And then the Assembly of God next to my grandma, I could just walk there. And
Mhm.
then I knew about the church bus. So then if we weren't anywhere that I could go with somebody as a kid, I would just call and I would go to church for myself. And a friend of mine went to a Baptist church. I would spend the night with her and her family. And they were great. And so when I was 9 years old, I gave my heart to the Lord and I've served God ever since. Yeah.
That's
And I
amazing.
think just, I think my dad was a Christian by then. He was praying for his family. And I just think that grace extended to me. I don't think he didn't, obviously he didn't know he was praying for a daughter he didn't know about. He was praying for his family, his children, but God heard his prayers and there was a lot of protection for me. I had a drive to go to church from childhood and I always went whenever I could.
That is like, that just makes me emotional because so many times we think that our prayers don't get answered, that God doesn't hear our prayers. But he was praying for a child he did not even know existed,
Yep.
and God had his hand of protection on you. I mean,
God
because
is faithful.
I mean, you were driving a car at 12. You could have been killed or killed somebody else. Or, I mean, it's just amazing how God worked in your life and protected you and then brought you into where you love Jesus so much that and gave you a man who obviously loved Jesus so much
Mm-hmm.
that y'all went on the
Mm-hmm.
mission field, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a big commitment. And you
Mm-hmm.
had mentioned before that you used to go on a lot of short-term mission trips. So you had a heart for missions anyway
Yes.
before all of that. So
Mm-hmm.
I just wondered, did Phil ever talk to you about like how he wished that he could have been there to protect you or save you from some of that?
He did, especially that first meeting. He was like, like he didn't love, he said, like, sounds like you didn't always have it easy. Then he said, you were a spunky little girl. Uh, and so, he didn't deal a lot with like saying how much he regretted things, not in a lot of words. He didn't wax eloquent on regret
Right.
a lot. But he would say things like, like with the blind, I don't want to see that man. I don't even know that man anymore up there on the screen. And we would talk about that if it helps one person. But he did, like you could see when we would talk about it, he would ask me questions. He would be curious about my life and then he would say, well, I'm glad you found me.
Mm.
I'm glad you found me. So Al was he heard some of my story, but one time my husband and I and the two of them did a marriage retreat together and I shared more of my story and he talked about it later. He's like, I was emotional
Mm,
watching you as an adult share that story, it made me mad and protective. Like I wanted to go back and protect that little girl.
mm,
And my Missouri brother, Roger, has said the same things. He's like, I didn't know all of that was going on. By then he was like, I left because it was so hard for me. And I didn't know that, he said, why didn't you come and stay with me? And I'm like, well, that's easier said than done. He was young also and had a wife that he's since divorced and a baby, and they were in Missouri and I was in Louisiana. And, you just don't realize. And I didn't even think about it, honestly. Like
mm.
I just kind of went where I needed to go, where I could get to. And I didn't think, oh, if I just went and lived with my brother Roger in Missouri, this would all be okay. Yeah.
Well,
So
you were a kid too. I mean, you're not going to have as rational of thinking as, an adult would. So,
I know that now. But as a
yeah.
kid, if you had told me anything, I would have been like, I don't trust you. I didn't trust a lot of the adults around me, honestly,
Mhm.
for good
Well,
reason. But
yeah.
if I thought if an adult thought they knew what was best for me, I automatically questioned that. And it really came to a head when I did move to Missouri and enrolled in a school there. The guidance counselor kept pulling me aside, like, what? Trying to understand, like, it was clear there was no parent. I would sleep in class because I was working. I would get out of school like early in the day. I would go work at McDonald's and close. And so the next morning I was tired,
Oh my gosh.
so I would sleep in some of my classes, but I made straight A's. But, they begin to get curious, like, what's going on? Wait, what? How old's your boyfriend? Wait, where are your parents? Don't we need to call your parents? So I'm like, good luck with that.
Yeah.
Like, you can call, but you will get
They're not
nowhere.
gonna, they're not going to
No,
answer.
no, it's not going to be a thing. And so I just didn't realize, and I thought I knew what I needed to know. And then, of course, now looking back, I can see why some people were genuinely concerned that I was so young. But by then I was, I had turned 18. Tony was 24. We were both adults.
You could do
But I had
whatever
my own
you want.
apartment. Like it was, I know it looked strange, but for me, it just felt natural. But I didn't know as much as I thought I knew.
Yeah. So, how hard was it for you to? I mean, there had to be some bitterness in there towards your parents, with all of the difficulty and you having to do everything yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
they wanted, I mean, your dad wanted you to take care of him. So,
Mm-hmm.
that was, there had to be bitterness in there as you were growing up.
Sometimes, you know, I think when you grow up in it, it's so normalized that you don't
Mm.
realize that it's not normal. And I would go to my friends' houses and look around. That's when I kind of started to notice. Like, I'm like, wait a minute, what? They live in this nice house. They have all of this and like toys. Even my cousins in Missouri, like I would go to visit my cousins in Missouri and like they had Cabbage Patch dolls and strawberry shortcake and all the cool toys. And I'm like, I don't have this. Like I don't have, it's not like I didn't have anything. I'm not
Right.
trying to make, there were
Right.
definitely great times in my child. There were moments that were great, but some of it's just normalized. And so for a long time, I did not know that some of that was not normal. It was later sharing my story. People were like, wait, what? Like, yeah, didn't you manage your money when you were 12? Like, I just didn't know, how odd that was. But I was very precocious and I was very mature for my age, kind of an old soul.
Obviously.
But that allowed also adults to put a lot of like responsibility on you. Like, and
Mm.
I've learned that now. And I can see that even with the families that I serve. Sometimes when the parents are not highly functional, the kid ends up taking a lot of the emotional responsibility and actual practical
Yeah.
responsibilities for the home, and they're called parentified, and that's also not healthy. But try to tell a parentified child what they should be doing, they're probably not going to listen, and
Mm.
there's a reason for that. So as I got older, and then as a mom, that's when I really started to understand that, like, wait a minute, I would never let my kid do that. That is not my kid's responsibility. And that's when stuff started to really dawn on me. And then as a nurse working with patients and seeing what I saw, I began to learn a lot more about myself. And then becoming even during the time that I became a therapist and lived in Louisiana and did a lot of healing, like I learned a lot about myself. Um, as a child looking back, when my therapist said something about, well, did you feel safe? You didn't feel safe. I'm like, yes, I did. I feel safe. And I had to leave that. I'm like, why am I feeling feisty about him saying
Yeah.
that? Like I was safe. And then I'm riding down the road and I'm like, it's because he just challenged my parenting skills of myself when I
Wow.
was a kid. And I'm like, I took very good care of myself. Thank you very much.
Yes, you did.
And it had to dawn on me, but I did the best I could. But was I safe? No. Clearly I did not feel
Right.
safe, or
Right.
I wouldn't have been so hyper vigilant and anxious all the time, you know.
Yeah, that's exactly
So,
right.
but it took a minute, like as even a 40 something year old woman, to begin to realize those things so I could heal from them. That's kind of the point of my book, is if you don't even realize where something went off the rails or how it's making you feel or act today, you don't even realize how much it's still affecting you in your relationships.
That is exactly right. And I think people, like you say, you just don't realize it. And so I want you to talk about like your relationship with your mom today because you've
Mm-hmm.
forgiven your mom for
Mm-hmm.
that, but
Mm-hmm.
it's still kind of the Bible says when Peter asked, "How many times do I forgive?" Seven
Mm-hmm.
times, whatever, I can't remember. And Jesus said, "No, 70 times seven, or seven
Mm-hmm.
times." And then Jesus says, "No, 70 times seven." And I've come to learn
Mm-hmm.
in my life that that is not an actual number. That is like if somebody offends you or upsets you or does something to you, 1,000 times. That's how many times you're
Exactly.
supposed to forgive them. And
He
that is not
basically,
easy.
doing some just fun math numbers, throwing it out there, was basically saying, like,
Yeah,
it's never ending. This is a
right.
bottomless pool that you draw from, drawing strength from the Lord to do it. Because in and of ourselves, that's why forgiveness can be so hard. If you're
Yeah,
drawing from your own strength, you'll wear out
yeah.
forgiving somebody 70 times 7 times
You
7 times
really
7.
will. Yeah.
You really will. And in my case, because things had been so rough growing up, I had a lot of experience forgiving my mother. Then something would happen and I would have another opportunity to forgive her. That just continued from childhood through teenage years, through young adulthood, and all the way up to the moment that I found this out. It wasn't like, oh my goodness, we are so very close and this has ruptured the relationship that I have with my mom. I already had decided that there's a certain amount of space that I needed to keep between myself and my mom, just so I wasn't re-injured all the time by
Right,
her.
right.
Um, and you and I talked about this a little bit before we started the podcast, that, when we start talking about these therapy terms that people throw around, and even social media influencers, people who aren't even therapists, toxic relationships and boundaries and all of those things. Like, I understood that, but even with everything that I went through growing up with my mom, I'd never cut her off. It just was, for me, another opportunity to say, like, this is yet another thing, but God's good. God's not shocked by any of this. He is still on the throne. He's sovereign. His timing is perfect. I do not understand all of the things. And I'm not going to try to understand things, because my mom is not the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings. My mom is my mom,
Right.
and she made her decisions the way she made her decisions. And some of them, I think, were self-preservation
Hmm.
and probably shame. It was the 70s.
Yeah.
Um, how would that have looked? She was separated from my dad, Wayne, while my dad, Phil, was separated from Miss Kay. And that's when they connected and had a brief relationship.
Do you think your
Um,
dad like ever like do you think he suspected since they were separated at the time that you were not
I
his?
wondered about that. One of the red flags that I ever had growing up is my dad would tell me several. He told me all the time. He would be like, "I didn't even know about you till your mama told the judge." So they were in some type of divorce. Like I said, they would get back together and separate. They were married and divorced twice.
Wow.
So it was when she told the judge, like, "By the way, I'm pregnant again." His child. So she just kind of assigned me to him, but they were probably having like visits, you know,
Swing.
while they were separated, just dysfunction junction. And my mom did tell me, and this is what she said, and my dad has no memory of this whatsoever, but she said she told my dad, Phil, like, hey, I'm pregnant. And he
Really?
was in whatever state that he was in. And I talked about it with him and Miss Kay, Alan, Lisa, we've all talked about it. And he doesn't have any memory of this, but my mom was like, he didn't want anything to do with having a baby with
Oh,
me. And so she said, I told him, he said what he said. I grabbed my things and I left and never went back. My mom has not always been known for telling the truth. My dad cannot imagine that he would ever be that way. But my dad was also running around and not living, he was living for the devil, like Miss Kay
yeah.
said. He was not right with God, and he could have been drunk or high or whatever. So I don't know exactly what transpired, but I know in my dad's heart, he did not realize that he had a child out there.
Right.
Even if someone had told him that, he was 70 something years old by the time I met him. And this was 45 years before. Um, and as far as my mom goes, it's just, why did she make her decision? She told me she didn't want me to hate her. I'm like, why didn't you tell me? You knew this whole time. I didn't want you to hate me.
Mm.
So again, self-preservation, not putting my needs first, putting her
Right.
needs first,
Yeah.
which was typical for her.
Yeah.
So none of that was shocking. It was just another opportunity to forgive. And today, even with everything, I have not, is it toxic at times with her? It is, but I still haven't written her off. I still
Mm.
haven't just cut her off. I use wisdom in my relationship with her, and the boundaries that I set are good, healthy ones. I don't want to make her feel bad every time I see her. That's not forgiveness. That's not
Mm-mm.
grace.
No, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
And that
so
doesn't
glad
mean that
to hear
every
that.
relationship is reconciled. It doesn't mean that every act of forgiveness means relationship or reconciliation, and every situation is different. But this I do know. The Bible talks a lot about how to live in relationship with one another and how to practice those fruits of the Spirit. And so, if God is telling us to be loving and kind and gracious and patient, then that means we're going to be around people who are not always perfect,
Yes.
right? None of us are, and relationships are hard, and parents aren't perfect and kids aren't perfect and things happen. But if we didn't need the fruits of the Spirit, why did God choose to write that, you
Yeah.
know so um being in a relationship is another opportunity to practice that. And so I don't really subscribe to the idea of just cutting people off
Mm.
cold turkey
And
and
I
not
agree
having anything to do with
100%.
them. Yeah.
I mean, a family, especially your parents, if there's any
Yeah.
way you can have some sort of relationship. And
Yeah.
again, like you said, boundaries. You
Yeah.
have boundaries and you work within those, but the Bible tells us to honor our mother and father
It
because,
does.
you know, even though it may have been dysfunctional, maybe they were doing the best they could. I don't know, but sometimes you
And
wonder
I've had
about
those questions.
that.
I'm like, I became a mom and figured out that these things weren't great. I don't know what happened to my mom. I really don't.
Right,
My
right.
sister
It
has
does
questioned
make
that.
you
What happened?
wonder.
But it's like, why didn't, some people just figure out, like, hey, I want to be a better parent. They read books, they find people to
Yeah,
mentor them. They go, within the church, they choose to put themselves under the wing of someone who may know more than them. And
right.
and that takes a heart of humility.
It
And a
does.
lot of people are not teachable, and they don't have the kind of humility that you need to say, I don't know it all, and I
Yeah.
need someone to teach me. And so that kind of humility is, again, something you've got to submit your heart to God, I think, to get. And he softens our hearts and helps us to be able to posture ourselves
Yeah.
to
Well,
live
pride,
at peace with people that maybe we don't want to live at peace with, or to learn from others.
yeah, pride goes before the fall. So, and God has shown me that a lot in my life. So, well,
Mm-hmm.
we've got a couple things I want to talk about before we wrap up, but I want you to talk about you moved next door to Phil and Miss Kay, right? So, how did all
Mm-hmm.
that work?
When we went down for our visit, and then we went again in March, I think. But he said, "Can y'all move down here? Can you move down here and
So he
get to
asked.
know you?" And so I'm like, you
Wow.
know what? Yeah, we should do that. Time is
Wow.
ticking. So they had the lodge just the next property over they owned, and had a little house on that. And that's where the Unashamed podcast first started, was in that podcast,
Okay.
or in that house. And so what we did was we moved into that house and lived just a 4 or 5 minute walk from them. And we lived there for 5 years. They moved the podcast to another location. And so we got to spend those years with them. And the first like 2.5 years to 3 were great, meals and hunting together and just spending time together, going to church together. It was so amazing. And
Wow.
um, I would go and see him as much as I could. I worked also. So, just like other families, I would pop in
Mhm.
before I went to work, or, pop in when I have a chance. And then other times we just spent whole evenings together, eating a meal, watching movies. It was very normal.
Mm.
And then, his health started to decline, and we did a little bit less, a little bit less. Um, but during those times too, I also went back to school for therapy, and we would talk, and he 100% supported me for that. He's like, you can help a lot of people. Like, I can see what you're doing. People need this kind of help. And so, finished school, went, finished graduate school. I went to Liberty Online. And then he got even more sick, the dementia. I saw that, early on, like those signs.
Did he
And it
have
was sad.
Alzheimer's?
He did.
That's what I thought. When
Yeah.
did
Yeah.
that like come about? Did y'all notice
It
that?
ran heavily in his family. Like I think out of 7 kids, 5 had Alzheimer's. Like his sister Jan had passed away in September, and she was still, I think, in her 60s, and she had it for several years. And so the theory is that when they were kids, they would spray the crops around them, and it would it would get into their water supply because they collected rainwater and things. So they're kind of hoping it was that, just because there were so many siblings with that.
Yeah.
But we kind of jokingly say that Al is on deck. He's the oldest. He's 10 years older than me. And we're like,
Oh,
we're kind
wow.
of watching to see if anybody else has these
That
symptoms,
is
because,
scary.
but he started to, people noticed it on the podcast. Like he didn't talk as much, or maybe he, was repetitive and, um, couldn't always stay with the conversation. And then it just kind of declined from there. And, I want to be a little selfish on one more time with him, but at the same time, it seemed to go pretty fast there at the end.
Mm,
So he wasn't years suffering with
yeah.
Alzheimer's, which would
Yeah.
have been just devastating. It was devastating to see that giant of a man
Oh,
be
yeah.
reduced to that. It was really, really hard. Um, but he never forgot who I was.
Really?
Um,
Wow.
yes, which was amazing. So now there were times when he probably didn't realize what we were doing. Like I bathed him once, like, just, he needed to be bathed, and he was
Right.
staying with us for a weekend. And so, people have asked, like, did he know that was you? I don't know if he did or not, but he didn't act like he did.
Yeah.
But even there at the end, very, very end, like he knew who I was, so,
That's a gift.
um, it was absolutely a gift, but it was a pleasure to get to know them that well. We could not have done that type of relationship building from Missouri, just making visits.
No,
So it was precious time that I'll always cherish.
that is so awesome. I'm glad you got to have that time with him and get to know him and the family and I
Mhm.
know you still keep in touch, right?
Mhm. I was there last weekend. Yeah. Yeah. Got to visit Miss
Uh,
Kay, hung out at Alan Lisa's
how is
house.
she doing?
She's doing so good.
Is
Like
she?
I call her the comeback queen. There was a couple times where she was really sick, and I just
That's
was
what
like,
I
I don't know if
thought.
she's going to make it, but she bounces back. And yeah, we sat, and she has this beautiful spot that they moved her into town to be closer to everybody, but
Okay.
she's got this cute little house, and she just looks out the back doors, like sliding doors, and they've got her little pretty yard ornaments out there. And someone from the church came out and hung, I guess Dan, who's been their helper, he hung a bunch of wind chimes up in a tree right out in the backyard that she gets to listen to, and she loves that. And somebody from the church made a sign that said Miss Kay's music tree, I think is what it says. And it was on boards, and they nailed that to the tree. So she just sits there and watches the animals, and she's got bird feeders and just chit chats. And I
That
brought her cookies that her granddaughter BK, great granddaughter BK, made for Al's granddaughter. She baked cookies. I brought them over to her. So it's just like, she's doing great. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that
Yeah.
because
Healthy.
you see stuff online and you're like, well, is that true?
Oh, they've got her and Uncle Si dying all the time. Like
Well,
it's not
that's what I'm
true.
like. That's why I wanted to ask because I was hoping that she was still in pretty good health.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad to hear that. Well, I want to ask you one question before we close. But what is if your book? It comes out October 6th. Is that right?
Yes, it's available right now for pre-orders from my website. And it's ineverknewbook.com. And
Yes, I just
I'm signing all of those and shipping them out
okay.
now.
And
Um,
I ordered mine, but now it's not on Amazon, right? Because I tried to
it'll be
find.
on Amazon soon. It should be soon
Okay.
available there, even for pre-order. So pre-ordering from the website, I'm signing those and sending them out. Pre-ordering from Amazon is about to happen, and then those will be shipped when the book is actually officially released, which is, yes, October 6th.
Okay. All right. Well, I have mine, so I'm looking forward to getting that. But
Awesome.
what is the one thing after somebody reads it? What is the one thing that you hope the message that somebody receives from the book is?
My hope is that someone who has been through anything traumatic or really hard reads this book and sees, like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize how much it was affecting me still. and there's hope. I don't
Yeah.
have to stay stuck in this vicious cycle of hurt and pain. I walk through lots of different things that's happened to me in my testimony, and it may not be the same thing that everybody that reads this has gone through, but the themes are there.
Mhm.
And that at the very end, a relationship with Christ and having hope in him, there is healing and there is redemption, and you do not have to suffer mentally, spiritually, because of the hard things that you've gone through.
Yeah. Is there anything that, I don't know if you address this in your book or not, but like a place that, say somebody does realize they need counseling, is there any place you can recommend for them to go to?
There's the American Association of Christian Counselors. I'm a member of that organization. They connect people with, I think it's on my website. I think it's Christian Care Connect or Care Connect. But I actually looked at that website recently, and it has a lot of, there's some therapists on there, and you can put in your zip code. But it's only as good as the people who sign up for that particular website. So there is an online database though of therapists. I think it's I need to find that out. I think it's Psychology Today or psychology.com, something like that. But you can find therapists in your area. But you can do a Google search,
Mhm.
networking, ask
Mhm.
around to find, and it may be pastoral counseling or professional counselors and sometimes coaches, but I do recommend professional counselors, especially if
Yeah.
someone's had a very traumatic, experience, whether it's medical trauma or sexual abuse or divorce or grief, um, substance abuse, addiction. And I list resources in the book about Celebrate Recovery, which I'm very
Yeah.
familiar with. Love that organization.
Mhm.
So there are resources out there that someone can go in and find, searching a
Yeah.
counselor in your area.
Yeah. And probably if they have a pastor too, they could probably reach
Mm-hmm.
out to their pastor and have, because I know sometimes it's nice to have somebody that's recommended
Right,
that
right.
that
But
you can
a person
trust.
can start with the American Association of Christian Counselors, and then it says like find a counselor, and you click it, and it pulls up the Care Connect
Okay.
site that you can type in your zip code and see if you can find somebody. But also the other link, and maybe you can put it in your show notes. I'll find
Yeah.
it, and maybe you can put it in your show notes,
Yeah.
and a link to go for just about everybody, and just read the bios, right? Like read the
Yeah.
bios of the therapists that are available, find out what type of therapy they provide,
Yeah.
and what type of what their framework is, and in oftentimes it'll say Christian counseling, and you can even search Christian counselors. I searched Christian real estate agent for us to find a house in St. Louis. So
Really?
there's lots of organizations out there and networking that
Never
you can
thought
do
about
to find.
that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. If you're looking for a believer, you can find them, but vet the therapist. And you know what? If you
Yeah.
find somebody it doesn't click, or you don't like the type of therapy that they provide, it's okay to say, hey, you know what, this isn't working for me, and find another one. They would rather you do that and have success
Yeah.
and be well than to try to stick in with something that maybe not working for you.
Yeah. So just before we close, I know you've said what you want the book to say, but is there anything else that you want the listener to know that maybe you haven't had a chance to really share and that you wish you could have said it somewhere? Is there anything like that you'd like to tell them?
I think, I was thinking about this today. I think so many of us see the negative, we see what's not going well. And I guess I would say be kind and gracious to yourself also. The Bible tells us to love our neighbors as ourselves.
Yeah.
So, especially with women listening, wives, nanas, how are we taking care of ourselves, ladies? How are we showing ourselves the kind of love and grace and compassion that we so easily offer to other people? But are
Mhm.
we offering that to ourselves and recognizing, hey, you know what? I'm doing the best I can,
Yeah.
and I'm going to take that posture of humility. There may be areas of my life I need to grow, but even that is such a sign of strength. So I would
Yeah.
love it if women just feel encouraged. They know there's hope. And then also just recognizing we're doing the best we can. If you're
Yeah.
waking up in the morning and doing the best you can to take care of your family, good for you, because
Mhm.
you've gone through hard things and you're still working, you're still striving to do
Yeah.
well. So, and then just turn this all over to the Lord. This anyone can really seek and get help. And even the best therapist can provide the best help, and you can even see some healing and growth. But giving your heart to the Lord, if you've not done that yet, turn it over to Jesus. Like that's where restoration and transformation happens, that no therapist can provide, that no
Amen.
friendship can provide. We've got to give that over to the Lord, and He'll do the rest.
Yeah, that is so true. Well, Phyllis, it has been fantastic getting to know you and hear your story in person and just sharing all the things that God has done in your life and in Phil's life it really is just, I hope the listener really has been able to see just the whole circle of how God took something that was so horrible in Phil Robertson's past and just brought him a beautiful daughter and a story of redemption, and that you have a whole new family that hopefully
Hmm.
is not dysfunctional anymore. So,
Oh, I don't know. Sometimes you look at them and you're like, oh my goodness, every family has their own version of things are not perfect right now. And
yeah,
so
yeah, they're just kind of crazy. They're just funny. So,
they are. But God is good. You're right. He brings
yeah,
beauty from ashes. So
he certainly
amazing.
does. Yes, but thank you so much and good luck. I
Thank
just wish
you.
you blessings with your book. And I feel like it might just hit the #1 New York Times bestseller list.
That would be amazing. That would just mean that more and more people are getting it. And I think it really will help people. Like that's why I
Yes,
wrote it.
yes, I can't wait to
Yeah.
read it. Thanks, Phyllis.
Thank you.
Hey friends, if you're here because you love hearing real stories of courage, faith, and family, I want to tell you something. God isn't finished writing your story either. Sometimes the next chapter begins when you step away from your everyday life and give yourself room to hear from Him. That's what the Flourish Retreat is, a getaway for women seeking clarity, calling, and connection. Over the weekend, Julie Bagwell, Brittany Bruce, and I will host sessions that help you see how your past may point to your purpose. Recognize the gifts God has placed within you, and consider what He may be inviting you into next. And in between those sessions, you'll soak in the beauty of the Lowcountry with historic home tours, carriage rides, shared meals, and deep conversations that turn strangers into sisters. If this podcast has reminded you that God can redeem anything at any time, imagine what He might reveal to you when you step away and let Him speak. I'd love for you to join us at the Flourish Retreat on Kiowa Island in October.